He was reaching across the table for the envelope when I finally understood that I had already won. Roland's hand. The same elegant hand that had held mine at 100 dinners slid toward the thick envelope I'd set between us. The one he believed was stuffed with the $40,000 he'd spent 4 months charming out of a lonely old widow. He did not know the envelope held cut paper. He did not know there were 2 patient people in a parked car across the lot, or that the pleasant man at the next table had a badge in his jacket, or that the woman across from him, the soft, grieving, gullible woman he had read so easily, had spent 40 years of her life reading the things that do not show on the surface. Roland thought he was looking at his payday. He was looking at the last free afternoon of his life, and he could not see it, because the worst breaks never do show on the skin. I am getting ahead of myself. Let me go back, because I owe you the whole picture, the way I was trained to give it, top to bottom, leaving nothing out, even the parts where I am the fool. My name is Marlene Fry. I am 75 years old, and I live in a retirement community on the Gulf Coast of Florida, the kind with the heated pool and the clubhouse dances and the palm trees that someone trims on a schedule, the kind of place people move to when the cold and the loneliness of the north get to be too much. For 39 years, before I retired and came down here, I was a radiologic technologist, an X-ray tech. I spent my whole working life taking pictures of the insides of people, positioning the broken and the frightened just so, telling them to hold still and hold their breath, and then reading the grey shadows on the film for the truth that the body was hiding under its skin. I was very good at it. I could find the hairline fracture that 3 doctors had missed. I could see the thing that did not belong. And I want you to hold on to that, because it is the cruelest irony of my whole story. That a woman who spent 40 years seeing through people let one smiling man blind her completely, right up until the morning I remembered who I was. Let me set one thing down plain and not pick at it again, because it is the shadow on the film that the whole story hangs from. Loneliness is not a foolishness. It is a fracture, a real one, a break in a person that does not show on the outside, that you can carry into a clubhouse dance smiling, dressed up, looking perfectly whole. And there are men in this world, polished and patient men, who have learned to read that particular break in a woman the way I learned to read a wrist, and who move toward it not to mend it, but to slip a knife into it. Roland was one of those men. He found my fracture before I had even admitted to myself that I had one. Hold on to that, because it is the difference between being a fool and being a target. And I have decided I was the second thing. Let me tell you about Russ first, because you cannot understand the size of the hole Roland walked into if you don't understand the man who left it. My husband Russ and I were married 46 years. He was an electrician, a quiet, dry, dependable man, the sort who fixed things without being asked, and never once said a romantic word, but warmed my side of the bed with a towel from the dryer on cold mornings for 46 winters. We were not a passionate couple in the way the movies sell it. We were something better. We were a known quantity to each other, fully read, no shadows left to find. I should tell you what my work was, really, because it is the spine of everything that happened. In a hospital, the X-ray tech is the one nobody remembers and everybody needs. I was the one in the lead apron in the dim room, positioning a shattered hip or a frightened child, or a man who would get bad news within the hour, telling them to hold still, hold your breath, don't move, and then sending the invisible light through them and catching, on the film, the truth their own skin was hiding. I read those films for 39 years, and what that work does to your mind over 4 decades is it makes you incapable, professionally incapable, of trusting the surface of anything. A wrist can look fine and be broken in 3 places. A man can walk in smiling and be dying. The skin lies. The skin almost always lies. The truth is underneath, in the grey shadows, and your whole job is to refuse the comfortable surface and read the shadow instead. I was the best in my department at finding the hairline crack that everyone else had looked right past. I tell you this not to boast, but so that you will feel, as I do, the full weight of the irony coming. Because the one film I refused to read for 8 months, the one surface I let myself trust against every instinct 4 decades had drilled into me, belonged to a man named Roland. And when Russ died, 3 years before any of this, a stroke in the garage with a half-rewired lamp still in his hands, the silence that came down over my life was the loudest thing I have ever heard. The children were grown and scattered. The house up north was too big and too cold and too full of him. So I sold it, and I came down here to the sun and the palm trees and the planned activities, because everyone said it would help. And in a way it did. And in the deepest way, it did not help at all. Because you can move loneliness to Florida, but it packs itself in the suitcase and comes right along with you. If you have ever sat in a bright, cheerful room full of friendly strangers and felt more alone than you have ever felt in your life, then you already know the exact country I was living in when Roland found me. And I would be glad to know you are out there in the quiet with me tonight. But let me get on, because that country, that bright, lonely country, is the hunting ground. And Roland was a hunter. He appeared at a clubhouse dance about 8 months after I'd settled in. And I have to be honest with you, because honesty is the only thing that makes this story worth your time. He was wonderful. That is the part nobody warns you about. They warn you that the scammer will be obvious, greasy, too slick, and so you spend your guard watching for the obvious greasy slick man. And you never once see the other kind coming, the kind Roland was. He was courtly. He held doors, and he stood when a lady left the table, and he wore a pressed shirt to a Tuesday card game. He was a marvelous listener, which is the rarest thing on this earth in a man. And he listened to me, truly listened, leaned in and held my eyes, and remembered the small things, and asked the next morning how my knee had felt overnight. He had a low, warm laugh and good manners from another era, and a way of looking at me across a crowded room, like I was the only film on the whole view box. He told me he was a widower too, that he understood the particular loneliness I carried because he carried its twin, that he'd retired from a long career in international shipping and had no one left to spend his evenings with. He was, in short, exactly, precisely what a grieving 75-year-old woman has long since stopped letting herself even dream of. And that, I would come to understand much later, in Detective Ruiz's gray office, is not an accident, and it is not luck. That is the product. A man like Roland does not stumble by chance into being your dream. He builds himself into it, deliberately, from a blueprint, listening for what you long for, and then becoming it, piece by piece, because he has built himself into 100 lonely women's dreams before he ever reached yours. And he keeps the blueprint, and he gets better at it every single time. I thought I was special. Being made to feel special was the service he was rendering. It was the anesthetic he laid down so I would not feel the cut. My daughter Paige saw it before I did. and I did not thank her for it. And that is the part of this I am least proud of. Paige flew down to visit 4 months in, when I'd started mentioning Roland in every phone call. And she met him for one dinner, and she was polite, and she watched him with the quiet, careful eyes she got from me, without either of us ever noticing she'd got them. On the way to the airport, she said, choosing her words like a woman crossing a creek on wet stones, "Mum, I don't want to upset you, but something about him isn't right. He asked a lot of questions about your finances, and he answered almost nothing real about himself. And I need you to be careful." And I, a grown woman of 75 who had been alone in the loud silence for 3 full years and had finally felt warm and chosen, alive again, heard those careful, loving words not as a warning, but as an attack. I heard jealousy. I heard a grown child who couldn't bear to see her widowed mother happy, who wanted me to stay grey, grieving, and small. I said things to my daughter in that car that I would give a great deal to unsay. I told her she had never wanted me to have anything good of my own. I told her she sounded like she resented her own mother's happiness. We arrived at that airport in a silence worse than any argument, and she got out. And for the first time in our whole lives, Paige and I parted without saying, "I love you." The calls after that were shorter. Then they were colder. Then they were mostly her brother passing along that Paige was giving me space. And Roland, of course, was endlessly, exquisitely understanding about the whole thing. Roland thought Paige was being so hard on me. Roland would shake his head sadly and say it broke his heart to see a daughter treat such a wonderful mother that way. And wasn't it a shame? And he was always there, always, with that warm laugh, to fill the space where my daughter used to be. I could not see, because he had built me so carefully not to see, that this was the most important move on the whole board. Isolation is how the hunter cuts the one animal out of the herd, away from the others who might lift their heads and smell what's coming. He did not drive my daughter away by accident. He did it on purpose, patiently, because a woman with a watchful daughter 4 months from a wedding is a problem, and a woman estranged from that daughter is a meal. Then it grew teeth, and it grew them slowly, the way these things always do. The first time money came up, it was nothing. It was charming even. A problem with his accounts, his pension from the shipping company tangled up in some overseas transfer. Just a temporary thing, so embarrassing. He hated even to mention it. He would never. Except that the timing was awkward. Could I possibly cover our cruise deposit, and he'd pay me back the moment the transfer cleared? It was a few $1,000s, and he paid it back within the month, every penny, with flowers, and I felt foolish for the flicker of doubt I'd had. That is the tell, by the way, the one I missed. The early small loan, repaid promptly, is not generosity. It is the X-ray they take to see if you'll hold still for the bigger picture. He was positioning me. He was telling me to hold my breath and not move. And I held still, like a good patient, because I had no idea I was on the table. After that, the asks got bigger, and the stories got more complicated. The way a lie has to keep growing more limbs to stay standing. The overseas pension was now a substantial sum. A fortune, really. Frozen in a foreign bank by a tax complication. And freeing it required paying certain fees. And the fees kept changing and growing. And each one was the last one, always the very last one. And each one he was so sorry to ask about. And each one I paid. Because by then, I had paid enough that to stop would mean admitting that the ones before had been lost. And that is the trap inside the trap, the one they count on. They call it the sunk cost, I learned later, sitting in Detective Ruiz's office. The more you have lost, the harder it becomes to stop losing. Because stopping means facing the size of the hole. And so you keep shoveling, hoping to fill it, which of course only digs it deeper. Roland understood that about the human heart better than any man I have ever met. And he used it like a scalpel. He had me co-sign on a line of credit, just to bridge the gap, he said, just until the transfer cleared. He had me move money into a joint account, to simplify things for when we're married. And I let him, because yes, by then there was a ring. There was a beautiful ring, slipped onto my finger on the clubhouse terrace at sunset, while a man at the piano played the song from my wedding. A song I had mentioned to Roland exactly once, months before, and that he had filed away with everything else he learned about me, the way a thief memorizes the floor plan. There was a wedding being planned, a date chosen, my old friends from up north already booking their flights, and a whole shining future that required, it turned out, just one more fee, just one more transfer, just $40,000 more to free the fortune that would take care of the two of us for the rest of our lives. I had become, by then, a woman planning her own second wedding at 75, glowing, telling the ladies at the pool how wrong they'd all been to give up on love. And I had no idea, none, that I was the easiest mark on the whole Gulf Coast. Because the easiest mark is always the one who is certain she is too smart to be one. I want to tell you about the night I almost wired that $40,000. Because I came within one click of a mouse of losing nearly everything Russ and I had built in 46 years. And a true story does not get to skip the part where the narrator is on her knees. It was late, and I was at my computer with the bank's transfer page open, and Roland's instructions written on a notepad beside me in my own hand. And my whole savings sitting there, one confirmation away from a stranger's account in a country I could not have found on a map. And I was going to do it. I had decided to do it. And the only reason I paused, the only reason, was that the routing instructions he'd given me had a small inconsistency in them. A name on the receiving account that did not match the name of the bank he'd told me. A tiny grey smudge of a thing, the kind of thing that means nothing to most people. But I was not most people. I had spent 39 years staring at grey smudges that meant nothing to most people and finding the fracture inside them. And something in the back of my trained mind, some old reflex that loneliness had buried but not killed, sat up and said the words it had said 10,000 times in a darkened reading room. That doesn't belong. Look again. So I looked again. I did the thing I had not let myself do in 8 months, the thing I had built my entire career on and then abandoned the moment a warm laugh made me feel young again. I looked at Roland the way I would look at a film, cold, clinical, without hope, which is the radiologist's hardest discipline, because hope is exactly how you miss the tumor, how you talk yourself into reading a shadow as nothing because you so badly want it to be nothing. And when I took the picture of Roland in my mind and held it up to the light and made myself read it the way I had read 10,000 others, the fracture was everywhere. It was in every story that never quite checked out. The shipping company I could never actually find. The late wife, whose name shifted by a syllable between tellings. It was in the way the money only ever flowed in one direction, from me to him, never once the other way after that first baited little loan. It was in his endless patience, which I had read as the devotion of a gentleman, and now saw, cold, as the discipline of a professional. Because no honest man courts that carefully, that slowly, that completely. It was in 8 months of him steering me, gently and without a single false step, away from my own daughter and toward my own accounts. The break had been there from the very first dance, running clean through the center of him, and I had simply refused to read the film because I did not want to go back into the loud silence. And he had promised me, with that warm, low laugh, that I never would. I sat at that computer a long time, with the transfer page still glowing in front of me. And I felt 2 things at once, and I will be honest about both. The first was a humiliation so deep it had a taste. The iron taste of a woman who had bored everyone at the pool with her love story, who had said cruel things to her own daughter to defend a thief, who had been read like a children's picture book by a man who did precisely this for his living. And the second thing, rising slowly up underneath the shame, the way the true diagnosis rises up under a frightened patient's hope, was the cold. My cold. The reading room cold I had lived inside for 39 years. The steadiness that takes you over when the picture is bad and there is work to be done and no use crying about it. The shame was the skin. The cold was the bone. And I chose the bone. I did not wire the money. And here is the part I am most proud of in this whole sorry chapter. The part that makes me an X-ray tech, and not just another broken-hearted old woman. I did not call him. I did not scream at him, or weep at him, or confront him. Because I knew, the moment I saw the fracture, that confronting him would only send him slithering off to the next lonely woman at the next clubhouse dance, with my $40,000 in his pocket, and a sad story about the unstable widow who'd accused him of terrible things. Confrontation is for people who want to feel better. I did not want to feel better. I wanted him stopped. So I did what I had done my whole career when I found the terrible thing on the film. I did not react to it. I documented it. I photographed the break, and I took the picture to someone who could act on it. I called my daughter first. That was the hardest telephone call of my life. Harder even than the calls I'd made the morning Russ died. Because this one, I had to make as the fool. The mother who'd chosen a con man over her own child and said wounding things doing it. I called Paige, and I made myself say all of it. Plain. No softening. You were right, and I was cruel to you, and I am ashamed, and I need your help, and I will understand if you are still too angry to give it. And my Paige, who got her backbone straight from her father, did not say one word of, "I told you so." Not then, and not ever. Which is a grace I do not know that I'd have managed in her place. She said, "I'm booking a flight tonight. Listen to me, Mum. Don't tell him anything. Don't change one single thing. Act exactly the same as you did yesterday." My daughter, it turned out, had spent the long, cold months of our estrangement quietly reading everything she could find about men like Roland, the playbooks and the warning signs and the cases, because she had known in her bones what he was from that one dinner. And she had been waiting, sick with helpless worry, hundreds of miles away, for the exact phone call she had prayed would come before the money was gone, instead of after. What we did next, the 3 of us, we did with the help of a detective named Russ in the county's financial crimes unit. A tired, patient man with reading glasses pushed up on his head, who had seen 100 Rolands and managed to put away far too few of them, and who sat up straight in his chair when I told him the one thing he almost never gets to hear: that I had not tipped my hand, that the mark did not yet know she was a mark. Because that, he told me, is the rarest and most valuable thing in his whole line of work. Almost every victim, the instant they understand, does the human thing, the thing every nerve in your body screams at you to do, which is to confront the betrayer, to demand answers, to scream. And the moment they do, the scammer simply evaporates. Off to the next county and the next lonely woman. Untouchable. Gone. I had not evaporated mine. I had him on the hook, warm and confident, reaching exactly where Detective Ruiz needed him. And that meant we could do the thing that almost never gets to happen in these cases. We could let him walk all the way in, all the way to the table, all the way to the closing of the cuffs. So I played the part. For 2 more weeks, I was the same trusting Marlene on the telephone, fretting about the transfer, asking his advice, while behind the curtain, Detective Ruiz and his people built their case on the accounts and the line of credit and the joint account and the 8 months of wire trails that all flowed one way. And then we set the table. I told Roland, tearful and apologetic, that my bank had flagged the overseas wire and frozen it, that the only way I could get him the $40,000 to free his fortune was in cash, in person, that I'd withdrawn it, and I was so scared carrying it around, and could we please just meet and get it done? And Roland, who had been so patient for so long, who could taste the finish line, agreed to meet me at a quiet restaurant on the water to collect his envelope full of an old woman's life savings. He was reaching across the table for that envelope when I finally understood that I had already won. I watched his elegant hand close the distance to the cut paper inside, and I watched the pleasant man at the next table set down his coffee and rise to his feet. And I watched Roland's face do the one thing I had waited 40 years of reading frightened bodies to finally see on the right person. The thing a body does in the half second before the mind will admit it, when it understands that the picture has already been taken, that the break is there on the film in black and grey for anyone to read, and that there is no charm and no story left in all the world that can talk a fracture off a developed plate. I have seen that look 10,000 times on the right side of the glass, on people who did not deserve it. Frightened mothers and frightened children, and good men getting the worst news of their lives. I have spent 4 decades being sorry to be the one holding the film. I was not sorry that afternoon. I watched it settle over Roland, the way the truth settles over everyone eventually. And I felt the cold, clean nothing of the reading room. And I thought, there it is. There's the break. I see you now. Detective Ruiz was gentle about the handcuffs. In a public place, with the gulf sparkling blue and indifferent behind them. Roland did not look at me. Not once. Not as they stood him up. Not as they walked him past my chair. And I think that was the single most honest thing the man ever did in all the months I knew him. That refusal to meet my eyes. Because the performance was finally over. The show had closed. And there was no version of his face that would play to this particular audience anymore. And a professional knows when to stop wasting the material. He was not Roland, of course. That was not his name. And he was not a widower. And there had been no career in international shipping. And there was no frozen fortune waiting in any foreign bank. There was, instead, a long string of women up and down the Gulf Coast and well beyond it, met in clubhouses and at church socials and, God forgive him, in grief support groups, which is where the freshest fractures gather. Widows and divorcees, some of whom had lost a few $1,000s, and some of whom had signed over second mortgages and lost their houses. Women in their 70s and 80s starting over with nothing because a courtly man had read their loneliness and emptied them out. Almost none of them had ever been able to do a single thing about it. And do you know why? Because every one of them, the moment she understood, had done the human thing and confronted him. And he had slipped away each time, wounded and dignified, into the next bright, lonely room, leaving her not only robbed, but doubting her own mind. My refusal to be human for 2 more weeks, my retreat into the cold, dark discipline of the reading room, was the one thing that finally pinned him to the table, where the rest of them never could. Detective Ruiz built his case on the bait I dangled, and on the 8 months of wire trails and signatures, on the joint account, and on the testimony I was steady enough to give because I had documented instead of detonated. Several of those other women, found through his investigation, got restitution they had long ago stopped hoping for. I got most of my own money back. The big wire stopped before it ever left. The joint account swept clean back to me before he could empty it. The line of credit unwound. I lost some. I will not pretend the number didn't sting. But I kept the house, and I kept Russ's pension, and I kept the one thing I had very nearly handed over along with the cash, which was my own good opinion of my own good mind. And I got one thing more, something I never saw coming. In the months after, letters arrived, 12 of them, from women I had never met. The other ones, the ones who'd lost and stayed silent. And every letter said some version of the same thing. Thank you for being the one who finally held still and took the picture. Paige is here now, as I tell you this. She did not fly home after the arrest. She stayed, and then she stopped talking about leaving. And now there is a little place 2 streets over with her name on the lease, and she comes for supper most nights. And we do not talk about Roland much, because there is not much left to say about a closed file. What we talk about is everything else. The years we almost let him cost us, her father. The small, ordinary business of 2 women who came very close to losing each other over a stranger's smile, and decided not to. I look at my daughter across my own kitchen table, the daughter who read the film before I would, who answered the cruelest call of my life with a plane ticket and not one word of blame. And I understand that she was the picture I should have been reading all along. The love that warns you is not the love that flatters you. I had 40 years of training to know that a thing that only ever feels good is the thing you should fear most. And I forgot it, and it nearly cost me the one person who loves me enough to tell me a hard truth to my face. I will not forget that again either. So here is what I'll leave you with, and then I'll let you go, because I think this one matters more than most. They will tell you, if you are old, alone, and some charming man pays attention to you, that you were a silly, foolish woman who should have known better. Do not accept that sentence, because it is wrong, and it is wrong in a way that protects the wrong people. You were not foolish. You were fractured, in the one place none of us can help being fractured, the place where we need not to be alone. And a professional found that break and exploited it. And that is not your shame to carry. It is his crime to answer for. But I will tell you the other half, the hard half, the half my 40 years gave me. When someone makes you feel too good to be true, that feeling is not a gift. It is a symptom. It is the warm flush that the body sometimes throws off over the worst break of all. And the only cure for it is to do the unromantic, ungrateful, life-saving thing. And look again. Look beneath the smile to the bone. The breaks that kill you never show on the skin. I spent my whole life knowing that about bodies, and I nearly died of forgetting it about a man. I will not forget it again. Neither, I hope, will you. If you stayed with me all the way to the end of this one, then I think you may be someone who has carried that hidden fracture, the lonely one, or who loves somebody who does. And I am grateful for your company tonight. Tell me where you're listening from, and tell me, gently, honestly, has someone ever made you feel too good to be true? Look again. It is not unkind to look again. It may be the kindest thing you ever do for yourself. Stay on a while, and I'll tell you another. The reading room is dark and quiet, the way I always liked it. And there's a chair beside me if you want it.